What's going on, everyone? It's the Fantasy Football Almanac, back at it with another rankings video. Today we're going over week 2 running backs, the top 30, so you know exactly who to start, exactly who to sit for your fantasy week, so you can absolutely destroy your friends, destroy your coworkers, all your league mates. Before we get into it, if you guys could, please go down, leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you do enjoy this video. You can always change your mind later and turn that notification bell on. With that out of the way, let's move on to our S tier running backs here in Saquon Barkley, CMC, and Jonathan Taylor. So if you guys have any of these 3 running backs here, you are 100% starting them. These guys are above the rest, cream of the crop running backs here. And if you somehow have to decide between Saquon, CMC, and Jonathan Taylor, that is not a bad problem to have. I want your fantasy team. Call me up ASAP here. But either way, let's get into the matchups now. Saquon and CMC are actually playing each other. It's Giants-Panthers. I would prefer Saquon very slightly just because he had the 30-point game. He looked really, really good. And I'm not exactly sure how Baker's going to look with CMC right now, especially with him only putting up 13 points. CMC will be absolutely fine. He still is in my S tier, but I would have Saquon as the number 1 running back in fantasy football right now. And then the Colts versus the Jaguars, we got Jonathan Taylor here, another guy, pretty much a must-start, dropping 26 points last week, and it is the Jaguars. The Colts should figure to go up early and go up early with Jonathan Taylor scoring a lot of points. They're going to be running the ball an absolute ton in this game. What more can you ask for? But that is my breakdown of the top 3 here. Then there is definitely a fall-off, but let's get into the A tier. So the first guy I have in A tier is Austin Ekeler. Yet again, my first guy in A tier here. Austin Ekeler going up against the Chiefs on Thursday night. So for one, that's really exciting. Should be an excellent matchup to see. And it is Thursday night, so you get a nice head start on your opponents if you do start Austin Ekeler here. But also, the Chiefs-Chargers is going to be an absolute shootout. If that is the case, which it will most likely will be, Austin Ekeler is going to be heavily utilized in the receiving game, which gives him a really high floor, but also a pretty high ceiling if he does get into the end zone here, which he should. He scored 20 touchdowns last year. Yes, he is due for regression in that category, but at the same time, not due for that much regression. Then we got Joe Mixon as my running back 5, second running back here in the A tier. They do play the Cowboys. Cowboys defense didn't really look all that great. I mean, they were getting some pressure on Tom Brady, but Leonard Fournette still looked awesome. And then when Leonard Fournette sat out, Rachaad White also looked really, really good. So I think Joe Mixon will be involved. The Bengals do look to stomp after what happened in week 1, the travesty. So I think they will come out here and absolutely mop the floor with the Cowboys. I don't think it's going to be particularly close. And Joe Mixon will be heavily involved in most likely what's going to be a positive game script here. Alright, so my running back 6 and my running back 3 in A tier is Dalvin Cook here. Dalvin Cook, a guy I do really like going up against this Eagles team. Well, yes, they do have a pretty stout defensive line. DeAndre Swift just ran 15 carries for 144 yards, and Jamal Williams scored 2 touchdowns here. So I'm not entirely concerned about Dalvin Cook. I think he will have a fairly high workload here. And we did see him get some good usage in Kevin O'Connell's offense. 18 rushes for 90 yards, so I'm not really concerned about the volume. I think Dalvin Cook is an absolute lock to finish as a top 10 running back, as he usually does here. And he's got a pretty good matchup and a potentially very high-scoring game against the Eagles here. Start Dalvin Cook. The next guy I'm talking about here is DeAndre Swift, the guy I was just talking about. A guy who got 15 carries for 144 yards in week 1 against a tough defense. And yes, he did only get 3 targets for 3 receptions. But DeAndre Swift, that should go up for him. He is known as a receiving back. I don't know exactly where he'll be at, but I'd say 5 or 6 targets is much safer to expect for this week 2 matchup. And although they did use Jamal Williams a lot in the goal line, DeAndre Swift was pretty unlucky, getting stopped at the 3-yard line a few times. So I think he will potentially score a touchdown in this upcoming game. They are playing the Commanders here, who did let up a lot of scoring to James Robinson coming off a torn Achilles, and even Travis Etienne looked good. So I think their defense is pretty weak here. DeAndre Swift is definitely a must-start candidate. He is the second last running back in my A tier. Now let's move on to our last running back in Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, yes, I know I have him low. I am a little concerned. One, he's playing the Bills, and yes, he did absolutely torch the Bills' defense last season, but at the same time, Derrick Henry did get touchdowns vultured from him from Helaire, which is a little concerning. And two, he really didn't look all that good with a poor offensive line to run behind. I do think he will have boom weeks, as he always does, putting up 30, 40 points and 3 touchdowns. I just am a little fearful that it's going to be this week because the defense is so tough, and Helaire is looking to be more of a goal line back, and if that is the case, or even close to the case, you're not really nearly as confident in Derrick Henry as you otherwise would be. Now let's move on to B-tier running backs here. So for my B-tier running backs, starting with Alvin Kamara and Leonard Fournette as my first 2 B-tier guys here. Alvin Kamara is playing the Buccaneers, which means Leonard Fournette is playing the Saints here. They are both playing each other. The reason why I don't have Alvin Kamara as high is because, one, he is dealing with a rib injury, and that is a little concerning for his overall volume if they do want to ease him back in. Plus, the Bucs are a tough defense, only letting up 5 points to Zeke and 2 points to Tony Pollard. That is really not all that much. And Alvin Kamara only dropping 7 points last week in fantasy football, so I am a little bit concerned with Alvin Kamara. Not much. I mean, I still think he is a really, really talented player and should look to bounce back with what he did last week, but it is possible age is starting to get to him a little bit. Maybe he's not the same player he once was. I still think he's an absolutely fine start, and the very beginning of my B tier here. But Leonard Fournette, a guy I do think is going to be pretty nice as well here. Consistently going to get you 15 points. Can't really be too mad. Yes, the Saints' run defense is pretty good, but this is the same run defense that just allowed Cordarrelle Patterson to run for 120 yards on 22 carries. So I think Leonard Fournette will be just fine, and Leonard Fournette is usually involved on passing downs, so that does give him a higher floor. If Leonard Fournette does score a touchdown, you're going to be happy with him almost no matter what. Next, we got James Conner against the Raiders here. It is looking pretty promising considering he got 72% of snaps, which is a lot. I mean, he's pretty much getting all the work here. And also, even though he only got 10 attempts and only had 26 yards, James Conner always gets in the red zone. Of course, he had a touchdown here, and he also got 6 targets for 5 receptions. No matter what, he is going to be utilized more in the rushing game, almost no matter what. I mean, I think 10 rushes is the absolute floor because they were getting absolutely blown out by the Chiefs. Now we should probably have more like 15 rushes next game. And seeing the 6 targets for 5 receptions is really promising because he is now going to be used primarily in the receiving game as well. I know Eno had some touches, but seeing James Conner as pretty much the workhorse back, you're just getting guaranteed volume, and in the spot, that's really all you're asking for from a B-tier running back here. But that's my third running back. Now we've got Najee Harris. Now, Najee Harris is a guy I would have probably had a little bit higher. But again, he is dealing with an injury. He is questionable with a foot injury. And he already had the Liz Frank question marks coming into the season. So I think it is fair to question Najee Harris's overall workload for this next game. And in this first game, only having 10 carries for 23 yards, very inefficient, and only 2 receptions on 2 targets for 3 total yards. So it's not like he really had all that much in the rushing game or the receiving game. Yes, he did have a touchdown that salvaged his week, but it is looking like there is potential that Mitch Trubisky does not like to check down as much as Ben Roethlisberger. And if that is the case, Najee Harris will be utilized a lot less. And that's why I do have Najee Harris a little bit lower as well. But let's move on. We got Nick Chubb here. Nick Chubb looked like an absolute beast, having 22 carries for 141 yards. Yes, he was sniped on 2 touchdowns by Kareem Hunt. And we'll get into Kareem Hunt sometime later in the video. Surprise, surprise. Not really a surprise. He's got a good matchup against the Jets. I mean, whenever the Jets not a good matchup, it's literally so free. And they're going to be running the ball an absolute ton. We saw Jacoby Brissett is not somebody who's going to be throwing the ball a lot. He had 140 passing yards. That's pretty much nothing. Nick Chubb looked like a beast behind this O-line. Kareem Hunt looks like a beast behind this O-line. But Nick Chubb will most likely be in line for more carries here. So that's why I do have him slightly higher than Kareem Hunt. But I think either of these guys are RB2 or flex plays on any given week. But now let's move on. We got our last player in the B tier here, Javonte Williams. Next up, we got Javonte Williams as my last running back in the B tier here. He did get 58% of snaps, so I was between 55 and 60. Pretty proud I hit the nail on the head here. 7 attempts for 43 yards. He wasn't utilized much in the rushing game. They did go down early, so that is something to note. But he was utilized a ton in the receiving game, getting 12 targets for 11 receptions and 65 yards. He was the most targeted running back in the entire league in week 1, so that is pretty promising overall. He does have a matchup against Houston this week, and I think Houston we all expect to be pretty bad. I know they tied against the Colts, but I don't expect to be much of a great team here. I would definitely start Javonte Williams, especially because you probably took him pretty high. Melvin Gordon does still look to be a thorn in his side, but at the same time, Javonte should still be a really, really good fantasy asset here, especially if he scores a touchdown in the next couple weeks. My first 2 running backs in the C tier are A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. Not exactly sure how to rank them. I literally have them at the exact same place right now. A.J. Dillon did get slightly more carries, 10 to Aaron Jones' 5, which is a bit surprising, and more target volume as well. But the thing is, Aaron Jones still projects to be a 50-50 in the split, and if that's the case, I see them as pretty much attached at the hip here. So I would prefer, I guess, A.J. Dillon if I were going out and trading for A.J. Dillon or Aaron Jones, because A.J. Dillon is definitely going to be cheaper right now. They also do have a matchup here against the Bears, and I know the Bears looked really, really good in their Week 1 matchup, but again, I'm writing that off completely, at least in terms of the defensive showing, because it was slippery, it was wet, I mean, people were sliding everywhere here. I don't think it's possible to really look at that game and say that's a game that's going to happen again. So I do really like both A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. They are the start of my C tier here. The reason why I can't have them higher is because I think it's nearly going to be a 50-50 split. And you don't know which running back is going to get it on any given week. It could be either of them. So that's where I'm kind of leaning here. Next, we have Darrell Henderson going up against the Atlanta Falcons here. Darrell Henderson should figure to get a vast majority of the snaps here, and I know the Falcons just shut down Alvin Kamara, but going into the year, the Falcons have the 32nd ranked defense. Their defensive line is pretty bad. And Darrell Henderson got 18 total touches to Cam Akers 3. If Darrell Henderson is the workhorse in this offense, it's a pretty dang good role considering what Todd Gurley was a couple of years back. Yes, Matt Stafford doesn't check down a whole lot to running backs here, and their O-line did get a little worse, but it's a guaranteed lock for volume if he is the starter. Kind of like a James Conner situation where he's going to be getting 15 to 20 total touches, and you are absolutely fine with that. And if he scores a touchdown, you are getting at least 15 fantasy points. So that's why I do like Darrell Henderson here. Next, I got Antonio Gibson going up against the Detroit Lions. Antonio Gibson proved that he is fantasy viable and has the trust of the coaching staff yet again, dropping 15 points last week and looking really good while doing it. The concern for Antonio Gibson is long-term. We don't know what's going to happen once Brian Robinson comes back into the offense. But in the short term, Antonio Gibson is definitely a value where he's going right now. And he's got a nice matchup against the Detroit Lions, a team that dropped 38 points and let up 4 rushing touchdowns. I think Antonio Gibson is definitely startable this week and startable until Brian Robinson comes back into this offense. Next, we got Cordarrelle Patterson, a guy I did kind of want to have higher because he's a lock for guaranteed volume here, but he is playing the Rams, a very, very good run defense here. But Cordarrelle Patterson looked really, really good in week 1, 22 carries, 120 yards, and adding 16 yards receiving. I mean, that's pretty dang good. For a guy we weren't expecting to come out here and do nearly that much. Yes, his role will be lessened when Damian Williams comes back, when Tyler Algier is back, but at the same time, if he does lose carries, he will be coming back in the receiving game. I think this is a guy I could absolutely rank higher, but he's a must-start now at this point, unless you have an insanely good running back situation here. He's pretty much a must-start here. I think he will be a must-start for the rest of the season, unless he does get injured. My last running back in C tier is Kareem Hunt, a guy I did want to have higher, but Nick Chubb is most likely going to be getting more work. It's not going to be a 50-50 split, rather a 60-40 split, but this is probably the most valuable 40% split in the entire NFL here. Kareem Hunt is looking like an absolute beast. I mean, guy got 15 total touches here, gets receptions. They use him a lot in the end zone, and that's really what matters. And they are going up against the Jets here, a team they could absolutely mollywop. They can go up early here by running the ball. And because they go up early, they're going to run the ball more. So I think it is absolutely possible to start Kareem Hunt in your flex here. I would prefer all the guys in the C tier above him very slightly here, but I think Kareem Hunt's a guy who can absolutely be an RB2 for your offense, no questions asked. Before we move on to the D tier running backs, if you guys could, please go down, leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It would really mean the world to me. Turn that notification bell on as well. You can always change your mind later. Love all you guys so much. And I'm going to be putting out fantasy football content every single day during football, so you never have to question anything. You can just come right here, get all your fantasy football knowledge, and destroy your friends, destroy your league mates here. But with that out of the way, let's start with these D-tier running backs. And our first running back here is Jeff Wilson Jr. Jeff Wilson Jr., a guy I do have in D-tier here. A guy I do really, really like. I mean, he still is definitely a starting running back if I have him in D-tier, because this would make him a running back 20, a running back 21, which would be a low-end RB2. And the reason why I have him in D-tier is because, yes, he did get most of the carries when Elijah Mitchell was out, but the 49ers backfield is one of the most confusing backfields in all of fantasy football here. Jeff Wilson is a guy I'm targeting over Tyrion Davis-Price, over Jordan Mason. But at the same time, I am a little worried to see how during normal weather conditions, they handled Trey Lance at the goal line. They handled Deebo Samuel at the goal line. These guys are both players who will be utilized in goal line scripts here, which might take away from Jeff Wilson's overall upside. I do think Jeff Wilson's an absolute beast player, and he was my number one waiver wire pickup for a reason. But at the same time, it is possible he is not utilized as much as we would like. And if that's the case, he may fall down this list a little bit. But at the same time, he does also have room to explode up this list. So I think the upside is absolutely worth it for Jeff Wilson Jr., but I wouldn't necessarily start him this week unless you need to. So my second running back that I have in D tier is Ezekiel Elliott. First and foremost, Ezekiel Elliott getting 5 points in week 1. That is pretty concerning. Only 10 rushes for 52 yards. Only targeted twice. So I am a little bit concerned with the overall volume when that compares to Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard only getting 2 points. But at the same time, Dak Prescott is out, which is pretty bad. They should figure to go down in a lot of these games early, and they're going to have to give up the run if that's the case, because their O-line is not good enough to continue grounding and pounding the ball without Tyron Smith here. And also the Bengals do have a pretty good run defense, so I am a little bit concerned with Zeke here. I wouldn't start him again unless you have to. This is where we kind of more so get into the range of players that are fringe starts, maybe flex starts here. But next, we got Clyde Edwards-Helaire here going up against the Chargers. He will most likely be heavily utilized in the receiving game because this does figure to be a shootout. And if that's the case, he should get pretty high volume in terms of the fact that he probably will get 10 carries. I think that is about fair. But also, we could see 5 or even 6 targets here for Clyde. And if that's 16 total touches on one of the best offenses in football, I am absolutely fine with taking that. As a fringe starter here, I am a little bit concerned with the overall split between him, Pacheco, Jerick McKinnon, and even Ronald Jones may factor in. But at the same time, I still think he will get decent work here. Maybe not the workhorse role that we figured he would be his rookie season, but he still will have decent work. And that's all you can ask for in this range of backs in the D tier. But we got 2 more players here in the D tier. The next guy I want to talk about is Chase Edmonds. Chase Edmonds, well, yes, he only had 12 attempts for 25 yards and did not get a touchdown. Got 4 targets for 4 receptions for 40 yards. Did put up 8.5 fantasy points, which isn't all that great, but we did see that he is the lead back over Raheem Mostert, which is what we wanted to see. He will be getting a fair amount of volume. I mean, 16 touches isn't bad for week 1. Getting used to a system still, first year on the offense. I could see that go up, but even 16 touches is enough to maintain viable fantasy starting, especially if he does get a touchdown here. They're playing the Ravens, which is a tough run defense, but at the same time, I think Chase Edmonds will be utilized to have a high enough floor, and that is good enough for me here. But now let's move on to our last D-tier running back in Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders, not a guy I was expecting to talk about much, but he did have 13 rushes, 496 yards, and a touchdown. More touchdowns in the last game than he had all of last season. Granted, every single Eagles running back had a touchdown. Boston Scott had a touchdown. Jalen Hurts had a touchdown. Kenneth Gainwell even had a touchdown. So, I mean, I think it was pretty much to be expected that Miles Sanders gets a touchdown here. I think he will come back down to earth after this game. I mean, he was very, very efficient on the ground, 7 yards a carry here. But at the same time, I still have to rank him now as a fringe RB2 flex type of running back here, just because he did command more volume than I anticipated and did get a target or two here. And this offense does look to be pretty electric. A.J. Brown looks insane. Jalen Hurts looks really good. This could be one of the best offenses in fantasy football. So I do have to move Miles Sanders up a little bit. But that is it for the D tier now. Let's move on to the E tier and last tier of running backs, starting with David Montgomery. David Montgomery is a guy I do have to move down a little bit. Yes, he did get 17 carries, but he only had 26 yards here. He did have 4 targets and 3 receptions, but I think the real storyline here is Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert getting 9 attempts for 45 yards on 5 yards a carry. And, well, yes, I'm not exactly looking at this game saying, okay, this is what's going to happen going forward. This does show that the new coaching staff at least will be utilizing Khalil Herbert a little bit. And if that's the case, we do have to move David Montgomery down, which is a shame because I was drafting David Montgomery pretty heavy. I would like to admit that I was a tiny bit wrong on Khalil Herbert versus David Montgomery split. But Khalil Herbert does look insanely talented and maybe a very, very sneaky waiver wire pickup. He is only rostered in 47% of leagues, starting in 3%. So maybe you could sneak him onto your roster if you had some wide receivers that did not pan out. I would be absolutely fine with taking Khalil Herbert here. Anyways, let's move on to the next 2 running backs here in Travis Etienne and James Robinson. They are playing the Colts here, which is a little bit of a tough defense. I don't think it'll be anything insane. We did see Rex Burkhead play decently well against this defense, but at the same time, I think it is a little bit scary, the touches between them. Well, Travis Etienne and James Robinson had a very similar snap share. James Robinson having a 49% snap count to Travis Etienne's 51%. The actual carry distribution and target distribution was a little bit skewed. James Robinson having 11 carries for 66 yards and 2 targets, 1 reception for 3 yards, whereas Travis Etienne had only 4 carries, 47 yards. Yes, he did look really efficient on the ground, had a couple breakaway runs here, and 4 targets for 2 receptions. I'm not exactly sure which way to rank these guys going forward. Let me know down in the comments below exactly what you guys think. I personally would still, going forward, have Travis Etienne over James Robinson, just because, 1, the draft capital, and 2, in the long term, Travis Etienne should project to be that guy. Travis Etienne having that terrible drop on the 3-yard line that cost him an easy touchdown. I think now that he's going to have his boots on the ground, his feet wet, so to speak, he's going to feel a lot more comfortable in this offense, which is going to get him more carries, get him more targets. But in the meantime, I think both these guys are pretty much going to be rocking a 50-50 split. And if that's the case, I would prefer to start neither of them, but if you have to, I would start whichever one you have. If you somehow have both, I think that was probably a bad decision, but I would personally rather start Etienne because of upside, but at the same time, I think James Robinson is an absolutely fine start here. Now let's move on, though, to my second to last running back in Rex Burkhead. Rex Burkhead's a guy getting 71% of the snaps. If that's the case, I will just take the pure volume play on him. 14 carries for 40 yards, which is pretty gross, 2.86 yards per carry here. But he also did get 8 targets for 5 receptions and another 30 yards. Rex Burkhead slept on pretty decent in volume. Yes, he's not going to be a hyper-productive running back, but if you are getting 20 touches, that is what matters here. That is what I care about. And Rex Burkhead's getting that. Yes, it is gross, some of the grossest 20 touches in the entire league, but as a fringe RB3 flex type play in deeper leagues, I would start Rex Burkhead. I would pick up Rex Burkhead if he somehow is still on your waivers here. I think he's an absolute steal, a great volume play. But now let's move on to our last running back in the E tier and our last running back in general in Breece Hall. Yes, I know, Breece Hall was out-utilized. Michael Carter getting on 60% of snaps, whereas Breece Hall was only on 45% of snaps. But don't forget, this is week 1 here. Breece Hall did have 10 targets for 6 receptions, which is pretty humongous. And yes, he did only have 6 carries for 23 yards, but this was a pretty negative game script. Michael Carter did have 10 carries here and 9 targets, so it does look to be a committee. I would prefer Breece Hall over Michael Carter just in a vacuum, but realistically Michael Carter is going to be a lot cheaper to trade for. I do think Michael Carter's role will slowly go down, but he still looks to be a good running back. And if this is a committee, I do want the cheaper option, but if I were building a team for redraft, I would want Breece Hall, because in the long term, Breece Hall is going to be getting more and more and more involved as time goes on. But that is it for my top 30 running backs for week 2. All your start sit decisions answered here. Please let me know if you have any questions down below in the comments. I will be answering any single football related question here. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy. You can always change your mind later. And that's going to be it from me. As always, have a good day, a good night, and a good life.